different taxes. So now the focus of this reform is to make taxation fair and also lead it to responsible borrowing, because if the tax basket is expanded with more organizations and individuals coming in the basket, then tax revenue will expand, and therefore the scope for borrowing will also narrow. Of course, the other side to it is sustainable spending, in which case the more people pay taxes and corporations as well, the greater the desire for what you call social compact, in which case people pay taxes and they want to see what they get in return from the government. So what I have here is a summary of the key issues in there. Exemption of small businesses from withholding tax compliance. That means for small businesses, any business earning less than 50 million per annum, zero tax. That is what it provides for. And of course, there will be reduced tax rates for businesses with low margins. And that recognizes that we all are in an inflationary environment where the cost of doing business is very high. So if because of the cost of doing business, a particular entity has very low margins, then the rates for such businesses will also be reduced significantly. Some category of manufacturers and producers, like farmers, will be exempted from taxation. And of course, the way it is designed, and it will progress, it will curb tax evasion and also minimize tax avoidance. But most importantly is that it makes tax easy to understand. And of course, compliance also very easy in terms of payment on the side of taxpayer, administration on the side of the agency concerned. So now, given all of this, now this coming to personal income tax, and this addresses the second question that Pastor Chua asked: what is the current status and what is proposed in the bill? If you look at the table to my left side, that is on the screen, personal income tax. Now, the current status of, let me call it the status quo with taxation, it says that for the first 300,000 that you earn, that is talking about the annual payment. Of course, that comes at 7% currently. But the proposed tax bill, which of course, when passed and signed into law by the president, it becomes a act. Now looks at zero rate for anyone earning from 800,000 and below. So in which case, it is now graduated by giving more latitude so that the tax liability will, of course, become lower for those who earn very low income. Now, that is for personal individuals, which means it impacts every taxpayer as a person, that's an individual. Now, the same thing, of course, as I said, affects businesses. If a business is a micro enterprise, even some small enterprises that earn less than 50 million in a year, they, of course, be tax exempt completely. But for the others, it will be graduated. There's a proposal also in the bill to reduce corporate income tax from 30% to 25%. But of course, I will come to that shortly, what has happened with the conversation with the Governors Forum. Now, the other two key elements, which of course, in fact, one of them became the real controversy that created concerns throughout the country, especially with what might describe as a divide between the North and the South in terms of interpretation. One interesting aspect, value-added tax. Currently, the allocation is 15% to federal government, 50% to state government, then 35% to local governments and federal capital territory council. Now, the proposed in this bill says federal government will give off 5% of its own allocation to the states, so that allocation to states will increase from 50 to 55%. The local governments and FCT councils will remain at 35%. Now, the logic behind this is simply that the plethora of taxes, especially sales taxes collected by state government, which we now have to drop off in the light of this enhancement of the pot, so to say, will now be compensated for by federal government yielding 5% of what it is receiving now to the state government as a kind of compensation. And that is in a good light. No state governor, no state is arguing against that because it favors them. All right. Now, where the real issue is the third table, which is the bottom one to our right. And that is, how do we share among the states? Okay. And that is where the real issue is. The portion belonging to states, how will they share it? Now, the current position, status quo, is derivation, 20%. Derivation means is every state, of course, collects, receives VAT from all the entities operating within its territory, and then in turn remits that to the federation account. Now, it says if you remit so much to the federation account, then 20% of what is remitted will come back to you as the state that deposited that in the federation pot. Let me use the word pot. Now it says equality, that is all the states will be treated equally. So 50% of the VAT collected federally will now be shared on an equal basis among the states. Then, based on population of each of the states, 30% will be shared accordingly. That is what we have currently. Now, in the bill that is still being discussed at National Assembly, it is proposed that 60% should be based on derivation. So, in fact, for me, as an analyst, maybe I will leave that one, because that's the third question that Pastor asked me. Now, it's in the proposed bill, it says, reduce equality from 50 to 20 and reduce population from 30 to 20. Now, but the Governors Forum, of course, came together last week and proposed to Mr. President, and that was what they agreed, that derivation should be 30%, which means increase only from 20 to 30%, maintain equality at 50%, then you can reduce population from 30 to 20%. That's what the governors agreed and proposed to Mr. President, who also said he was ready to dialogue and negotiate this. And of course, he also acknowledged that and thanked the governors for that. So the agreed sharing formula as proposed by the Governors Forum and also agreed by Mr. President is 30, 50, 20. Now, this in fact happened to be the most controversial. And why is that so? Because if you look, for example, at Lagos and Rivers State, they are the ones that remit the most of tax VAT collected in Nigeria today into the federation account. And so if you base it on derivation, currently they receive 20% of what they remit, and the same applies to all the states. But under the reform, the argument is now made that VAT is a consumption tax. If it is consumption tax, then the reference should be more to the states where consumption of those products and services are taking place. So, and if you do that, then I will now use an example. If you take a bottle of Coca-Cola, for example, yes, it is brewed in the breweries of Nigerian Bottling Company, different locations throughout Nigeria. But the headquarters of NBC is Lagos. So when it therefore renders VAT returns, it will return to the federal port that tax came out of Lagos State, okay, without taking account of the fact that its product is being consumed throughout Nigeria. So in which case, Lagos benefited more for the fact that most company headquarters are in Lagos. The same thing applies to Rivers State, especially for oil service companies and oil producing companies, most of whose headquarters are in Port Harcourt. So to that extent, therefore, if you look at current distribution, there's a law that goes to Lagos and Rivers State based on derivation. But what this bill now wants to correct is that in actual fact, Coca-Cola produced by NBC is also consumed in Katsina. It is consumed in Bayelsa. It is consumed in Kwara State. It is consumed in Ekiti State. So why should all of that be attributed to Lagos? We use the word attribution. So it now says attribute what is rendered to the states where the products are consumed. If that is the case, it means what will come to Lagos based on derivation will reduce. What will come to Rivers State based on derivation will also reduce. But every other state will benefit in the sense that they will now have attributed to them more than what either to under the current status they receive as derivation. So but the pushback from the governors now said, hey, derivation, pushing it to 60 is too high. We rather still have equality at 50, and then we do derivation at 30%. Now, there's a lot more, information in my slide deck that the attendees will get. The third question, talking about the impact of this. Now, we can look at that from the perspective of the taxpayers on the one hand, and then on the other hand, look at it from the point of view of the government, whether federal or subnational, that is state or local government. Now, for the taxpayers, individuals will now pay less tax than they used to do. And then those who earn a lot more, from 50 million and above, they will now be paying more tax than they had been paying, because anybody earning above 50 million will be paying a tax rate of 25%, which means the reform being done is now making taxation in Nigeria to align with the principles of taxation and also what might describe as the global best practice, in which case the tax system will become progressive. When we say tax system is progressive, it means those who earn more will pay more in terms of rates, and those who earn very low will also pay less tax in terms of the tax rate. But on top of that also, it has provided for exemptions for those who are at the bottom of the pyramid. That's for individuals. Now, for companies as well, the reforms have brought in the same, recommendation, which is good for the economy at the state where we are, if we really want to grow. Understanding that MSMEs are the bastion of growth of any economy that intends to grow inclusively. And so the reforms therefore brought a lot of tax reliefs at that level for MSMEs. Below 50 million, income in a year, the MSME, we pay zero tax. That's exemption, okay? So, which is good. And that also means that at that level also, we can create more jobs. Now, for the big corporates, if the argument made by the reforms, committee are now accepted eventually by National Assembly, it will mean that corporate entities will also pay less tax. If they do, that gives them more room to also expand their operations, employ more people. So at both ends, therefore, it creates an environment for job creation. Now, coming to the government, and that's the one that is of higher interest to me. And why do I say that? And that is now looking at a country that has been a model of inclusive economic growth in the last 30 to 40 years, and that is China. What China did a reform of taxation, which nobody seems to be talking about, was that they restructured the tax system and incentives in such a way that the regions started competing with each other in terms of creating value. So which is what this particular reform, in my interpretation, was going to do for us, that if derivation will move up to 60%, then every state in Nigeria will become more conscious of the fact that if people living within my own space, I empower, they consume more of what is produced locally here, then more will be attributed to my own state in terms of contribution to VAT. And therefore, I will receive more resources when it comes to allocations, and therefore more revenue for the state. And that is the way I look at it. So due to the gender competition between the states, but this competition, of course, will be highly productive one. And that is what I see as the impact. Unfortunately, our governors didn't want us to go that high. They still believe in equality remaining at the same level of 50%, which to me is not that challenging in terms of competition. So thank you very much, Pastor.
Thank you for that presentation. already covered in answering this question. Did you hear what I said?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
I said, are there any other things on your slides that you still want to cover that you have in answering my question? Any other thing, or you've covered most of it?
Okay, thank you very much. I will go back to it and then show on the slides again what I had left out. Okay, I will go back to this. And this is also very interesting. Two things I will add to what I've said, and that is the issue of claims that can be made by any taxpayer, especially when it comes to, VAT is an input output tax. Let's take a company just to illustrate. That company buys some items as inputs. Now, some of those inputs already carry in them VAT, charges. So, but that company uses that to produce. So, what this reform now says is that instead of waiting interminably, or in fact, not being able to claim the VAT on its inputs, he can claim that now within 30 days, in which case the company gets back the input VAT that it paid within 30 days. So which means value comes back as quickly as possible. And that is good in terms of, for businesses that also pay VAT on their inputs. Then the other thing I want to add, this relates to the real estate sector in particular, that when a security is registered for a lending transaction, any distribution of payment that is made to a real estate investment trust or real estate investment company as provided in the Companies Income Tax Act will also now there will be compensation for that. In which case, it recognizes that when you pay tax, and this is a standard practice. Incidentally, it was one of the areas I investigated in my doctoral research about 41 years ago when I was in UK, because that was the dimension that was brought into my doctorate research by the University of Sussex. And what was it? This taxation issue. And it says, when it comes to taxation, now there is a difference between the body of tax and then the impact as different than the payer. So it then says that, look, if a company borrows money, that ordinarily should be taken account of as the interest on that loan is a benefit to the financial institution. So if the company that borrowed money, after paying the interest and other charges on the loan, now pays tax on what remains, it says under the tax practice globally now, it is double taxation. So what the tax system we now recommend is that there should be a tax credit that relates to the amount of interest and other charges paid on that loan. So that will now be deducted before arriving at the taxable income of the company that borrowed money to do business. So in which case, it tells you that it pays therefore for companies to borrow money to do business. So it is a kind of incentive that drives growth in the corporate sector. So this reforms also takes account of that. And what this does is to encourage businesses to borrow and, of course, do business with that. That's expansion. Expansion of corporate activities is also expansion of the economy. As they expand the activities, they employ more people to be dealing with different macroeconomic challenges at the same time. Dealing with unemployment, of course, dealing with inflation as well, as we produce more locally. And of course, as the companies also make more profit, they pay more taxes, government revenue also grows. So it's a winner on every side that we look at it. So that I thought I should also speak to, So thank you very much, Pastor. Okay.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I was muted. Okay. So what do you think the impact on the economy will be with this new tax reform? It's not looking like, how are they going to be able to collect more taxes? How are they going to widen the revenue base? Because right now, the zero taxation, if you're earning less than 100K or so per annum, I think that quite a few people will escape. Turnover, if your turnover is also 50 million and below, zero taxation and all that, that's beneficial to the low income earners. So if you are not, if those were paying 1 million tax before, it means that if they're out of the tax bracket, that 1 million is lost. So how are we going to be able to increase fiscal revenue, or am I missing something?
Okay, thank you very much. A very good question there. And I will respond to that from two different perspectives. One is there is research that has proven, and this is an international one, that when tax rates are reduced, actually revenue expands. And the reason is simple. As people pay lower taxes, they are encouraged to actually contribute more. So you are likely to get more people come into the tax basket on the one hand. And if, on the other hand also, and that is what these bills also propose, that the tax system is truly progressive, then those who earn more will also pay more. So what would have been a loss from those now exempted from taxation will be taken up by those who pay more because they are at the higher, income bracket. Research has proven that, no doubt. And also, another perspective to it, and that the fact that now Nigeria is intensifying national identity. Already we've seen that in the financial system, where every bank account also carries the name of the bank customer. But not only that, even in our immigration activities, you have an international passport in Nigeria, it carries your name as well. So that means that as more and more people get into the banking system, financial inclusion is also increasing. It means it will be more difficult to evade tax. And that is how they all connect. So it then means more people will come into the tax basket. And as that happens also, it creates an opportunity to expand the revenue of the government. At the end of the day, government will be a winner. And of course, citizens, whether corporate or private individuals, will also win in a progressive tax environment. And that's the way it goes. So but essentially, there's also the unification, I will use that word now, where the plethora of government agencies that collect taxes, revenues, levies, dues, and whatever name they call it, now everything is collapsed and centered in one single agency, and that's the tax authority. And I use an illustration. Nigerian Customs Service, they collect duties and some other levies, but their primary mandate is two-headed. Head number one, secure our borders. Then the head number two is trade facilitation. But Nigerian Customs Service has more or less moved away, drifted away from its core mandate and given a lot more attention to revenue mobilization, which is not its mandate. So under this bill, therefore, every government agency that is involved in revenue collection and generation, that particular duty is now ceded, to the new entity to be created through one of those bills.
Will that not be too much work for that particular entity? How will it ensure efficiency and this and that? I can talk for harmonization and avoid double taxation and repeated taxation and being able to talk to one agency concerning all your taxes. But how will that affect efficiency and ease of collecting taxes? And these days where tax people, I don't know if they're going to be able to capture more people into the tax bracket. And I don't know what the role of technology will be in...
Huge one. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think you are just spot on, sir. Now, the place of technology in the whole milieu is very, very important. And so there are three key elements here emphasized in the reforms. Number one is data. So which means it gives an opportunity to an agency that will have access to data on taxpayers. So, and the more we deploy technology within that space, the more we can use data for tracking taxpayers, how much they are paying, what the revenue translates to for government, and even the opportunity of blocking leakages. That's one side to it. Then also, it will create an environment for more tax intelligence, not just like we see in other jurisdictions. Take, for example, the IRS in the United States of America. IRS relies a lot on data and technology to track what people are paying, and so to determine whether you actually pay tax according to the statutes or not. So that also will become big in our tax practice in Nigeria. That is tax intelligence. But as you rightly also identified, it is indeed at a time where there be a lot of capacity building, within that particular entity. So the whole idea then is that what those agencies were doing, and of course, creating opportunities for a lot of leakages, will now be able to deal with that effectively using technology and, of course, expanding the capacity of that particular agency, as the practice is in many other countries. If, for example, you compare our population and payee in Kenya and South Africa, it is in fact very embarrassing when you see the kind of figures they collect as payee in Kenya and South Africa, whose populations are much smaller compared to that of Nigeria. And of course, the same thing applies when you look at corporate income tax. So if we're able to go through this route of becoming more intelligent in tax administration, collection, and the general tax practice, the likelihood is that we'll expand tax revenue and therefore reduce two things: our dependence on hydrocarbons, and of course also our dependence on borrowings.
Yeah, thank you very much. There's two things I want to also ask you to tackle.
Yes.
Everybody knows that even from the biblical days, there was a lot of corruption in tax administration. And
That's
even
right.
still right now in Nigeria, it is not totally eliminated. That's number one.
Yes.
Then there are
Yes.
also various agencies that also act as tax agents. Some of them are privately owned, some of them are owned partially by government and quasi-government officials. And they also tend to collect tax on behalf of government and then earn huge commissions, which would have come to government directly, but is now going to individuals. Okay, yes. I don't know if you want to speak to that. And then finally, so I've spoken about the agencies that collect tax, corruption, administration and tax management. If this will curb corruption and all that, increase efficiency, and this issue of various agents collecting tax on behalf of government, and so on and so forth, and the level of transparency that the tax authority will have. Are we going to be able to know exactly how much tax has been earned or generated? And what did it cost us to generate that tax? Because I know that the tax authorities, they spend quite a lot of money in generating this tax and all that. So we want to really look at that before we now look at the disbursements of our monies, even from taxation. Then the final thing I wanted you to also look at is ease of doing business. You know, you want to widen the tax net, you want to increase the thing. There's a very, very high unemployment rate at this point in time. Many people are underemployed. What is government doing about employment? What is government doing about ease of doing business? We know how frustrating, how difficult, how challenging, how embarrassing, how irritating it is for a simple businessman to do simple business in Nigeria and all that. And all that is affecting even the ability of government to generate revenue and all that. And I have one more thing in terms of the skewing of our resource base. You know, we're not producing, we're importing everything, and we're using our own money to finance other economies and provide employment to other economies. I don't know if you want to also speak to that briefly.
Okay, so thank you so very much.
Questions from the floor.
Okay, so thank you so very much. And the first issue, I put it as an agency where, yes, a plethora of government agencies collect taxes and revenue in different, designations. And of course, the instance of even private entities that now serve as tax consultants in terms of collection, not advisory. So what this simply means, and I'll give an illustration. About 2 years ago, a younger brother of a friend of mine walked up to me and said he has a friend who is in fact, an auditor. And he identified a federal government agency that collects revenue because in setting it up, there's a statute that indicates a certain percentage of what any financial services organization generates should be paid to that agency. Now, this fellow said when he researched that space, he discovered that there was 136 billion naira uncollected by that agency. So, and the way the agency was set up, the chairman of his board happens to be the Nigerian president. So this, my friend's younger brother now said, please, do you know any of the ministers or advisors to the president who report directly to him, not to any other person, but directly to Mr. President? So I told him, okay, there's a friend of mine then, that let me talk to him. So he said what he wants is to propose to that particular agency, but take it from the chairman of the board, who is the president, so that if he gets the approval, he will help them collect the 136 billion naira, then requesting for 10% commission. And I said 10% commission of 136 billion naira is 13.6 billion naira. So in my view, I thought that was an aberration. Because ordinarily, if that agency was efficient and carrying its mandate effectively, it shouldn't need someone else to come collect it on his behalf. And that is what we see happening. So one of the things these reforms also aims at, from what I've read in their reports and the bills itself, is to strengthen the tax agency in such a way that it will have capacity to do what it's supposed to do without needing to employ a consultant for collection purposes. In which case, like it happens in other tax jurisdictions, those who are in tax consultancy will strictly focus on advisory services, not helping to collect taxes, but offering advisory services that will improve the effectiveness of the tax system and also improve the efficiency. So that is what it's supposed to be. Now, no doubt, what I referred to earlier on as leakages is what, Pastor, you said here, as corruption. We know that quite well. So, and that's why we say that the current status quo we run, there's a lot being collected from taxpayers, yeah, but not all of it is being delivered. So that's why I talked about leakage. Again, I'm sure any business person here will have a lot of experience to share in that regard. So a lot of those things are really discouraging, and it connects to what you also made reference to, ease of doing business. Now, the issue of transparency, very fundamental. And then cost of collection. Let me use the custom, for example, in cost of collection. Now, under the status quo, until the reforms began in June 2023, customs will collect duties and other levies. Then it will do an estimate of the cost of collection, deduct it from what it collected, and remit the balance. But the fiscal reform that began in June 2023 now said, wait a minute, you are collecting on behalf of the federal government. So the totality of whatever you collect should be delivered to the financial account. What will now be released to you is what has been approved in your budget for that year. So we have seen that particular aspect of fiscal consolidation that began. And so the idea now is that looking at all the state-owned enterprises, SOEs, and government agencies that generate revenue, some of them were mandated 100% of what you generate straight to federation account. Some of them 50%. And of course, that was now streamlined. So that limited the scope for leakages. That has happened in the last 16 months, to 18 months now. So, and it is good for Nigeria, and it reflects in what gets the federation account and what the governments also share, as we can all witness. So one of the things then is that if we don't have multiplicity of agencies collecting, it will give us an opportunity also to reduce the cost of collection. Then, for ease of doing business, if you recall also, there was a time in dealing with foreign investors, we created a one-stop shop at Nigeria Investment Promotion Commission. And the idea was that all government agencies that an investor, a foreign investor, we need to obtain approvals from, let them be in one single hall. I was involved in that, so I can talk confidently about it. Now, the whole idea was that you walk into that hall, from one desk to another, you get your approvals processed and you can move on. So the focus of that was to ease doing business. Now, from the tax perspective, if instead of dealing with 62 different taxes and levies as a business owner, I'm now dealing with less than 10 single digits that these reforms are proposing. For me, that is an improvement in the tax environment in terms of ease of doing business. And equally, and there's an interesting dimension I want to also bring in. Now, there are so many reforms being done. We see a slide where I have that, which we share with the attendees. I summarize all the reforms in one single slide. Now, you notice now that this time around, reforms are not, standing alone. Every one of them is connected. And I will pick one to illustrate. The consumer credit reform says that the government is opening a space for you to borrow money to buy everything that you normally will use: furniture, vehicles, solar power systems, televisions, fridges, freezers, and so on and so forth. But you can take this credit only if what you want to buy is produced in Nigeria. In which case, the focus of that particular reform is to reduce the scope for corruption, in the sense that instead of looking for so much money to buy all of those things, you can access single-digit credit from the Nigerian Consumer Credit Corporation, which is called Credit Corp. So you have access to such, single-digit loan to buy those regular day-to-day items that you use. So, but at the same time, you are buying from those who produce them in Nigeria. So if you want to buy furniture, it produces and will provide that loan for you to buy furniture made in Nigeria. So that way, you are empowering businesses that produce this in Nigeria, and you are creating a market for them. But at the same time, you are providing affordable credit, what we call democratizing credit. I happen to be one of the advocates of this for many years. When we worked on the financial sector strategy for year 2020, that was in 2007, my company led the credit market team. This was the argument we made then: democratize credit, which means make credit available, accessible, and affordable. So one of the reforms, therefore, says let's make consumer credit available, accessible, and affordable. So that we then also drive local production of those items, because that is what that credit is available for. So on the other hand, if we produce more and consume what we produce, then our dependence on imports for day-to-day needs will also reduce. And that's the nexus between them. So it's different reforms that are connecting one way or the other. We call it internal consistency. Unlike in the past, we do reform of one side and we leave others. So for us as policy advocates, we've seen an improvement in terms of how we are doing this particular reform. So thank you very much, Pastor.
Thank you very much. Let me hand over to Pastor Sonny if he's on the platform to now take over and conduct the question and answer sessions. And those who have any questions should indicate by raising up their hands electronically, and then we'll take it from there. Thank you very, very much, brother.
Thank you very much, Pastor. Thank you very much, Mr. Adedipe. Thank you for the good work you've been doing in Nigeria. We follow you on all the television stations that we see you, and you have been making this very strong argument. You are welcome to this our platform. The way we run it is, my name is Sonny Enebi. The way we run it is after this engagement with Pastor, members may have questions burning to their hearts that they want to clarify. So they are going to raise their hand electronically, and then they will be able to ask their questions. But before I go to the members, I have a few questions of my own.
Okay.
TETFund is one area of contention in this tax reform bill. I have had people say, they say progressively, by the time it gets to 2030, it will stop. And we all know the good that TETFund has done since it was introduced. Actually, the university lecturers are saying that they came up with this idea and these suggestions, and that they don't want it to be touched. And it was one of the things that the governors also said should be left. What's your take on that?
Well, my take on it is that when you create different funds, like TETFund,
yes,
it's to address a particular gap in a sector.
Yes.
Now, ordinarily, if your system is working well, then the allocations for different important areas of need wouldn't be something to debate. But unfortunately, each time the budget goes to the National Assembly, different reasons and motivations determine what gets allocated for different activities and functions. So, and I think it was that deficiency that brought up the argument for TETFund. So, in my own view, if we have a redefined and reset fiscal structure and system, we shouldn't need to worry about TETFund being, let me say, lose its purpose. Take, for example, we know how much goes to TETFund. There's a possibility of making that provision and even making it constitutional going forward, so that you won't need to have an administrative structure that also costs money to drive what happens in TETFund. It is not that structure that matters. It is what it provides for the university system. And in my view, if we are really serious about that, it is something that can still be provided for in the reforms that we are talking about. That's my own opinion, though.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. I have one or two other questions. And guys, if you're on the platform and you have any question for Mr. Adedipe, please just raise your hand electronically. We'll acknowledge you and you'll be able to ask your question. I have these two questions. Taiwo Oyedele is good. He has come up with something fantastic. Zach Adedeji is good. He's running FRIS today. But we know, like everything Nigeria, those that conceptualize a project and an idea, no matter how good it has been in the conceptualization and introduction, sustenance of that particular thing is always a challenge. So today we have President Tinubu, who is passionate about tax reforms. And he has good people at the helm of affairs who are running this process. What happens 4 years down the line, maybe 8 years down the line, or thereafter? How do we ring fence what we are doing today to ensure that it is sustainable beyond this administration and even forever?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Now, I will just give two perspectives to dealing with the issue you raised. Number one is to institutionalize the process. Now, once you institutionalize the process, you take it beyond a particular individual. In which case, my argument is always that whatever you want to endure, put a structure around it and also put a system around it, structure and systems. The moment you build those two around whatever you want to be enduring, then you have taken it beyond an individual. All right. So that I think also, and that's my second angle to it, is what we are now doing with the tax reforms. That's those bills. Those bills are restructuring the institutions for tax collection and administration, and at the same time also providing the system that we can run with without any particular individual being necessarily required. I mean, take, for example, the practice of Annual Finance Act that was introduced during the tenure of President Buhari. A good development in terms of managing tax, because what it does is that it gives you a window of review and update of the existing statutes. So no statute is ever perfect anywhere in the world. It always needs to be updated from time to time. So when those that are impacted by the tax give their feedback to the government, what we call regulatory impact analysis will be conducted, and then there will be a review and update. So first, institutionalized, which is what we are doing currently, in which case we won't need a Taiwo Oyedele in office or a Zach Adedeji in office for this to continue to work for Nigeria. Put institutions there, and then all we need to think about is how to sustain it. And I will give another example from my personal experience. When in 1999, President Obasanjo came into office, and then we discovered at the Nigeria Economic Summit that Nigeria needed a kind of institution that will pursue corruption. So the idea of EFCC and, of course, ICPC were brought up. Along with that, we also recommended Nigerian police to be strengthened. That, in fact, annually for 10 consecutive years, we should add 50,000 annually to the number of policemen in Nigeria. Those were the recommendations made at the time. Of course, EFCC today has become an institution, but the pioneer chairman of EFCC is no longer there. And I recall the media interviewed me on this in 2007 when President Yar'Adua replaced it. And my response then was that EFCC as an idea had become an institution. And that Nuhu Ribadu no longer being chairman, if there is no one that can take over after him, then as a leader, he has failed to develop a successor. So in which case, if you have institutions, it will go beyond individuals, it will now be about strengthening the institution, and also in the process, whoever is there is also developing those that will succeed him or her. And that's my perspective here.
All right, thank you. Strengthening institution is not only about individuals, it's also about capacity. Capacity
Correct.
of the leader, capacity of the people who are working there, capacity of the people to get the job done. Because
That's right.
Can we say EFCC is still as effective as it was during the Nuhu Ribadu's days? I don't think so. You said that you recommended that they should add 50,000 police every year.
Annually for 10 years.
Did that ever happen?
It didn't happen. It was just a recommendation.
It was just a
You know, policy
recommendation.
advocacy. You say you will give the reasons for it, and then the people who make the final decisions will choose how to go.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. We'll take a few questions from the floor. I have about 4 hands raised. What we do is we try to take 2 or 3 questions together so that you can answer them together. I don't know whether you have a pen to jot them, but
Yes, I do.
we can also help you jot them down here. So on the way you appear on the list, I will take Pastor Funke Awolowo first.
Okay.
Unmute yourself. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening. That's a really robust and in-depth exposition on taxation. And I learned 2 things. There was a time, somebody was saying that Tinubu brought a lot of progress in this area, but I think from the time Fowler was there and he became even LRS to the federal, there was a time we were saying it was like taxation was the new oil. It was bringing in a lot of money into the system. And you spoke of two things, that I feel I want to question you about. That's what we call proportional taxation, so that everybody is not leveled out. And this is what they use in UK and all that. And sometimes the rich get angry because they feel that they pay more taxation and it's not fair. And secondly, you spoke of derivation. I want to ask, is that being effective right now? Because what we are saying in the system is that it appears the North have more advantage in this area, because what we see, in the system is that everything is leveled out and the distribution is the same. Meanwhile, we're not bringing the same thing to the table. Also, there's a system they use in Lagos. They call it TAMA. I don't know if you're aware of it. And I see that system just helping the rich to get richer, because it's only people that are in the know, and they go after companies. And I see that the monarchy, the people who have connections on a certain level, are the people who get those tax returns. And I want to know, is TAMA really that legal in terms of monetary policy of the system, or is it something that is a spillover that the government is not in full cognizance of, and it's just systemic kind of rot going on? That's those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pastor.
Thank you very much.
I will take Auntie Yemisi Ransom Kuti. We'll take those two, then I will come to Bimbo Ashiru. And okay, yeah, there was somebody else, but your hand went down. So I will come to
Peter Eze, I think.
Yeah, Peter Eze is next now. Yeah, Peter Eze. Sorry, Peter Eze, unmute yourself and ask your question.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Adedipe. Thank you for, I couldn't miss your session. Thank you so much, sir. I want to take from where the anchor, the question he asked, and what Dr. Adedipe's response was. I want to believe, and the reason why I could have glossed over it, the reason why I want to say it is, I'll listen Nigerian matter. Sometimes I don't want to comment, but I remember that I'm still living here. I've not gathered money to Japa, and my children are here. So I still have a very strong vested interest. My parents are here and all of that. So I haven't gathered money to move everybody out of the country. So I will still comment. So reason why I think it's difficult for us to build an institution, this applies to government and applies to organizations and churches. Somebody is doing something good. There's a politics within, let's other people come in. And then we move the person completely. What an organization loses when somebody who is skilled goes is the knowledge. I believe Nuhu Ribadu should have been on an advisory board of EFCC for another 5 or 10 years. You shouldn't have taken that guy out. That is when you validate his leadership. When he is there overseeing to see, he's not going to interfere. But there was a role. Nuhu did a good job. Now, whether some people, it's arguable, but I'm just saying, people like that shouldn't have been moved out completely. When somebody does a good job, keep him somewhere. The madam that asked the last question talked about the former tax guy. Very controversial, but he brought results. I believe that guy should have been in somewhere. Maybe whether you call him a grandfather, ancestor, whatever it is, but he should have been somewhere there. Anyway, I've said that in terms of institutionalization. Now, my question to Dr. Adedipe is in two areas. I think that there might be need to calibrate the categorization of MSMEs and all of that, because even some of the businesses that we call big business in Nigeria are still SMEs in the real categorization sense of view. They need to recalibrate it. Where I don't know whether that can still be done. My second question, which is very, very key, is on the derivation formula. Doctor, I was thinking that it should have been, because this is an act, I was thinking that it should have been state lawmakers that should be kicking or accepting this. Why is it governors that are the ones kicking? So I feel like there's a mismatch there. Why do the law allow that the governors have so much power to, infringe on something very critical like this. It should have been state government lawmakers to say, oh, we don't want this formula, because certainly the whole thing was a rent-seeking arrangement. You give to people who have more population and all of that. I don't want to speak to that. It's quite controversial. So, Doctor, please, why does the law not allow lawmakers to be the ones to speak to this? And it is state governors who we already know the things that they are doing there. Thank you very much.
Okay. Let me allow the doctor. Yeah, you can attend to those two. Then I will come to Yemisi Ransome-Kuti and Bimbo Ashiru.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. The first three issues raised by Pastor Funke Awolowo, the first, I agree with you. This reform actually is bringing Nigeria in that direction where our tax system becomes more progressive. And the idea simply is this, and that's the logic that is used to explain it anywhere in the world, is the fact that if you are wealthy in Nigeria, the Nigerian environment provided you the opportunity to become wealthy. No doubt, yes, you exerted. There's no doubt about that. But what it says is that that space, whichever way you look at it, has provided you that opportunity. So if therefore the opportunity, you may say you're fortunate and you became wealthy, it says you should, in that principle, also give more back to the society in developing that space. And of course, if you also look at it from the big picture, if that space is more conducive for business, it means you will also be able to make even more money. That's the way it goes, the argument for progressive tax systems. And I see that in the structure of taxation being proposed in these bills. So, and I'm happy you made reference to UK, US, and a couple of other advanced countries where the system runs. In fact, even in Africa here, it's the same thing. That is why, for example, you see a lot more being collected per capita in Kenya and South Africa that I made reference to earlier on. Then the issue of derivation. Yes, for me, and I mentioned that in my presentation earlier when Pastor Itua asked me that question, that I believe strongly that what we have currently doesn't challenge the states to be more, aggressive in promoting business within their territories. And I'll give you a quick illustration. Sometime in year 2010, I served in the presidential committee that President Jonathan then appointed to review federal government expenditure and advise on how we should go. Now, as part of that, the work of that committee, we found that nearly 28 states in Nigeria, either 27 or 28 now, was not, let me say, fiscally viable at that point in time, meaning that if those states did not receive allocation for the federation account, there was no how they could stand alone. All right. So now, it then meant that for such states, they will be pushing more towards equality rather than looking more at how do we make our own territory, more conducive for business so that more value is created within my space. And I recall challenging a state governor sometime, I think in 2004 so. I was invited to address the executive council of that state. I won't mention the state. And I presented the figures to them that, look, your state is ranked number 34 out of 36 in Nigeria. And the governor now did a pushback. And I said, it's not my data now. I'm just using the World Bank data on some national fiscal position. So what I think you should do,
maybe you should,
is to look at how do we address that so that you become more competitive. Interestingly, the starting for the allocation based on equality and population, which accounts for 80% of how we share VAT currently. Unfortunately, they push for that at 70%, only a 10% decrease, which means there's no challenge for them to look inwards and do things that will grow their IGR. So that's, in fact, I agree with you. And of course, when it comes to tax rebates and all manner of things, I've seen a lot in that regard. I mean, where someone who was importing rice, for example, brought a request to the presidency for tax import duty waiver over that will amount to about 2.5 billion for just one load, one shipload, 2.5 billion naira, waiver of import duty. And I challenged it then because I was then in the cabinet of President Jonathan in 2011. And I said, tell me, how many jobs will you create if you are given this rebate? In which case, rebate again, the way it has been managed, and those are some of the things that these particular reforms will eliminate. So let me leave it there so that I don't tell too much stories. Let me come to the issues raised by Peter Eze, my very good friend and brother. Now, what we say is that you don't build institutions around individuals. If you build them around individuals, the day they exit, the institution will collapse. That's why the argument globally is always that you should build institutions and strengthen institutions so that they can exist, survive, and remain effective and efficient, even when the individual driving it has exited. That is one thing we did not do effectively with EFCC at the time and ICPC. They check their records today, both institutions, and that's why I disagree with you, Peter. Those institutions today, they have good records of successful, prosecution of, errant, let me say, entities and individuals. There's no doubt they have chips on their shoulders today. And we cannot say that the chips on their shoulders today can relate to the period that Nuhu was in charge. So it is better for us to continue to strengthen institutions and get them to fulfill their mandate. Now, in terms of recalibration, we need to start somewhere. If you look at definition of SMEs done by Smidan before but this form now says, for tax purposes, we regard them SMEs as companies earning 50 million and below annually. Tax exempt. I think it's a good point to start. Of course, we can subsequently look at that and review it. But, for me, it's like saying, what should be the minimum capital required for a bank? Why should it be 500 billion for a national, authorization? Why not less? Why not higher? So when it comes to numbers, I don't usually want to get too much, display so much energy on that. Then derivation, when there's no law that can compel governors to stay away from this argument. They're also part of the stakeholders. But for them, it is more than to my own policy, my state. And I think that is why they are the ones championing, all these arguments and the debate. And of course, they came to some recommendations last week. And hopefully, the National Assembly will consider that, but ultimately take a position that may not necessarily reflect what the governors have said. That's my own thinking. It's still left with the National Assembly. So the final thing will come from them. And then, of course, Mr. President will assent, to that, and we can move forward. Like I said, these things can always be reviewed again and again as we go forward. So thank you very much. So if I go by what the monitor said, Auntie Yemisi Ransome Kuti, you should be the next one. All right.
That's very correct. Auntie Yemisi Ransome Kuti. Yes. Then after that, we'll have Bimbo Ashiru. Yeah. Auntie Yemisi, you can unmute yourself. Yeah.
In engaging government.
So
if it's difficult,
I hope I have unmuted myself now.
Yes.
Can you? Good. My dear Dr. Adedipe, thank you so much for coming on again. An erudite and holistic presentation. We were together a few days ago at the Chamber of Commerce, where you gave a very robust and optimistic view of what we should expect from this tax reform regime. My question is that we say in Nigeria that what goes up does not come down. yes, businesses will get some relief, and a lot of mainstreaming and streamlining will go on. But what are your predictions for the cost of goods and services? Will they go down? Or will those who have benefited from these largesse keep the money and still maintain the high prices we're all paying for goods and services? That's my question. Let me thank you once again for coming on to speak to us.
Very good one.
Okay, thank you. You can go ahead. Otumba Bimbashiru, if you are still on the platform, just raise your hand again so we can see you. But in the meantime, I think you can take
Yes,
it.
okay,
It's
his hand is
here.
up.
All right, good. All right, I've unmuted you. Unmute yourself.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Prof, how are you? I think some people are talking at the background. I don't know.
Yes, I don't know who something is talking.
Well, I think it's anti-MC that is doing combined honors there.
Okay.
Yes. My questions have actually been answered, but I just have a few comments.
Yes.
The one when Sonny was, he seems to have confidence in government to sustain this and building institution around it. I will tell you this. I think the problem is, let's just get it this way, that it is the characteristics that's inherent in an individual that determines the way we run your show. Somebody was sworn in a few days ago, and he has signed executive order of about 20 or 100 because it's the president.
40 something. They were 40 something.
40 something.
42.
And the issue of the one I just got today is the issue of discrimination. The law that should not discriminate. Yeah. But he has even cancelled it. The law that was in 1965. He has even cancelled that you can discriminate. It should be based on. So what I'm saying basically is that luckily Professor Adedipe has been part of this government probably from Obasanjo day. He's my brother, my friend. I consult for a company I'm into. He's been part of the government. If you look at the trajectory of these past leaders, how he has advised them, this is what they should do. So what question I want to ask him is that we've been with Obasanjo, we've been with Yar'Adua, Jonathan, and Buhari, then present government. So how would you now probably rate the way out their seriousness and sustainability? How are they going to be able to sustain all these things in terms of economy? Because, for example, we are now talking about this tax. I'm surprised that the governors came back a few days ago to come and say they agreed with. They didn't agree, because I spoke with them individually. Some of them individually didn't agree with this. So I don't know what prompted them to come out and say they are now agreeing with the policies. And I'm happy with what Professor said, that it will still go to the National Assembly. I know that they are all playing games with all these things, because this thing is affecting some people directly and it's affecting some people indirectly. So people are looking at their selfish sense. And the gentleman, Peter Eze, that spoke about Nuhu Ribadu. Don't worry, Nuhu Ribadu have more power now. He's now the Nigerian Economic Security Advisor. So he can even advise EFCC. The point I have is that the issue of EFCC, the way they are operating, anyway, is like having a brother in prison, you don't talk about them. So they too, they have their own issues. They have their own. Somebody stole $30,000. That's what they exposed. But do you know what they've done? They've sacked about 12 of them. You could see that even the people that they said they should arrest people, they're actually the one hating and compromising. So the point is that I just want Professor to tell us how he feels about this government, their seriousness. Because we're talking about institutionalizing something, sustaining something. It's not easy. If a president comes in and says, well, for example, Mr. President said, the way I run Lagos, I've been able to turn Lagos to increase the income from 600 million naira to billions of naira, which is fantastic. But how can this be sustained? You spoke about Zach, that is doing very well. You spoke about the gentleman with KPMG, or where was he before? That is there now. That is talking about tax. And he said the governor didn't give him support. So I don't know what happened. And they now came back the next day, a few weeks later, and said they are now unanimously signing. And not all of them were there. Only a few of them were there, not all the governors. Only a few of them were there. So I think I just want to tell us about these things, because I think there's more problem than what we are seeing as a country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Otumba. Okay, so let me respond to those two questions, just following the format already established. Is that okay, Mr. Sonny?
That's okay. That's okay, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, the first question from Auntie MBC is on the issue of relief and how that can be passed on to the final consumer. Now, in my own, I will say, experience and research with the peculiarity of the way we do business in Nigeria, there is something that I will use to illustrate this. There's a law, for example, in the US that makes price gouging punishable. That means arbitrary increase in prices without a reference to the fundamentals. But in our own climate, there's no law of that nature. So many times, products are priced. He told me someone wanted to replace the tires of his car, and then he called one of those he normally consults. Can you please order tires for me? And he did. By the time the merchant came, he told a price that the facilitator said, I bought tires for another customer just last week from you. How come? And the fellow said, well, I decided to increase it because I saw that the Naira exchange value has diminished. And so the argument was that, so but the stock you have in store is what you brought. He said, yes. Now I now made the argument that I need to make more money so that I can restock. So they find all manner of excuses not to pass on gains and benefits when there is cost saving to their own consumers. I think that is more an issue of our value system and orientation. Because there's no law that can compel merchants to pass on whatever savings it costs or rebate they receive to their customers. There's no law for that in Nigeria. But we can begin also to reorientate our merchants so that they see that, well, let me use this word in context, that it is a godly and also, beneficial to the society for common good when whatever gains you receive in terms of cost is passed on to your consumers, and or in fact even good for business, because the lower your price, if the product is not price inelastic, it means you can actually sell more. So that is the kind of thing we should be making our merchants understand. Now, on the comments by Otumba Bimbo Ashiru, I'm with you in this. Yes, we have been involved in policy advocacy for a couple of decades now, running through these various, civilian, even in the military era, the time of Babangida, and Abacha, and of course, had an occasion that put something out to Abacha's government, and they sent back to me a carton of documents to convince me that the position I took and advocated was different than what the government was seeing. And I wrote a memo back. And I said my position would change. That was in 1994. So these kind of things, yes, we've advocated over the years. And what we find is that I find it very, quote and unquote, funny when our governors push back on the tax reforms. And it was, President Tinubu is a consummate politician. That's my interpretation of what he did. Now, okay, even though we are not going to back off on the reforms, but the contents can be discussed and negotiated. I think that was what made the governors now develop the muscle to come out and say, this is our position. And that comes to something I saw on one of the charts here. And the person said, what is my position with the governor's submission? I don't agree with the governors in their submission. If you ask me, we should push more in the direction of derivation so that each of them can go back and become more innovative and creative in generating, in driving more activities that will result in VAT collection within their own territory. Yes, I agree with Otumba, Ashiru on the issue of continuity. And that comes to the point I made earlier about strong institutions. What Nigeria needs are strong institutions, not strong individuals. For the day the strong individuals leave office, that will be the end, the collapse of that system. But if institutions are strong, and that in fact is the challenge I see before the US today and the rest of us in the world. Because you see a man who's making every effort to weaken institutions. He tried it during his first term. The institutions in the US were able to stand against his onslaught. But now it's coming this second time around prepared. And of course, we can see, like Otumba said earlier on, how many executive orders he signed this first day in the office, 42. Some even report 47. And of course, the man is still signing other executive orders day by day. Okay? So, but in my own thinking, hopefully, the US system will be able, and the institution will be able to still checkmate him at the end of the day. So that's when we look at such democracies. I mean, look at what happened in South Korea recently. For the president to be arrested for trying to introduce, martial laws in South Korea. So that is a matter of strong institutions, where the institution now proved itself to be stronger than the person who occupied the office of the president. So that's the kind of thing we're advocating. So that is what we sustain the society and make it to grow in a way that we bring common good. So I will leave it there so that we can.
Thank you very much, sir. This will be the very last question. We have to take Professor Nike Grinch. She just raised her hand. So after that question, you can begin to round up. So, Prof, we allow you to unmute and ask your question or make your comment.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Adedipe, thank you very much for enlightening us at the grassroots level. This area of taxation has always been a very perplexing issue to those of us who are I would say those who are contributing without even knowing what we are contributing to, and what will be the result of the contributions. I think that, first of all, we also need to look at what the revenue generated from taxes will be used for.
Yes, ma'am.
It's one thing to collect money. People, they love to collect money. But when it comes to accounting for what has been collected, everything goes into secrecy. There's no transparency at all. So I want to ask you, is there a better pathway for accounting for revenue collected? I mean, has this been looked at? That's number one. Number two is what is the situation with tax exemption for civil society organizations, religious organizations, etc.? Are they also automatically exempt from taxes, and so on and so forth? Finally, I have one special area that I'm looking into, and that is the return of diasporans to Nigeria. Some of them come, particularly doctors, they come to set up hospitals and all that. But what they are using to set up their hospitals are not produced in Nigeria.
In Nigeria, yes.
So, yes, so they have to pay a lot, to import these equipment, etc. What can the government do to assist them in reducing the cost of these things, so that we can attract more of them to come in and set up? Thank you.
Thank you so very much, ma'am. These are very important issues that you raised. The first is on utilization, especially on the two important words you also mentioned, accountability and transparency. In my own view, there are two important things that can help in that regard. Number one is disclosure. I mean, we've seen this happen before with the government, where they will publish in the media allocations. Yes, of course, that now we can see, of course, through the National Bureau of Statistics on their website. So we can see that. But the whole idea is that if we sustain that disclosure, process, where we get to know how much goes to each state government, how much now under the reform goes to every local government, because effective this month, local governments are now fiscally autonomous, which they receive directly their own allocation without that passing through the coffers of the state government. So, which means we need to sustain disclosure. Then the second aspect is what I call citizen engagement. And that is where we talk about social compact. I'm a taxpayer, so it means I must not go on complaining about corruption and what I expect that is not happening. I should engage government officials, functionaries, in terms of what are they doing with the money they receive from us. That is what is called social compact. You know, I will say an idea promoted by United Nations. And I remember many years back, we signed into that at NSG. So it then means citizens will engage and ask questions. And I remember recently that President Tinubu made a remark on that now local governments are getting their own money, that the citizens should start asking their chairman what they are doing with more money they receive. The same thing, of course, will happen at the state government level, because the state governments now receive a lot more than they were receiving before. You know, despite that, some will argue the time value of the money and, of course, the role of inflation. So in my own view, if we sustain disclosure and there is citizen engagement, we should be able to encourage governments to utilize effectively what they receive as tax revenue. The second issue, I don't think the reforms have said anything contrary for the status quo with respect to faith-based organizations and CSOs. So, but again, maybe when we go and interrogate that, but I haven't seen anything that will change the status quo with respect to faith-based organizations and CSOs. Now, on the diaspora's return, and this is something I've advocated over the years, what I've seen in other countries. Each time we hold the annual International Tax Conference, it's always something I mention. In fact, I will say two things. One is the fact that if there is a sector that we desire to strengthen, then we should put that as part of our tax system, some rebates that will attract investors into that particular space. And I often use the example of Ghana many, many years ago. Ghana was weak in information technology. So what they did now was to say, look, if you're a foreigner that is coming to invest in that space in Ghana, and you bring a minimum of $20 million at that time, there were certain incentives and rebates we have access to. So, and of course, that went well for Ghana. And I see that in several other countries. So the question is, if we really want to build that sector, and we see it as important, in fact, it is indeed, because for me, two enablers are education and health. If you want a healthy population, that you also want to be productive, those are two areas you don't joke with. We call them soft infrastructure. And of course, you can complement with hard infrastructure, the roads, bridges, railways, and so on and so forth. So if we are interested in diasporas, I recall about 10 years ago, there were some 30 Nigerian doctors and pharmacists in the US and UK that approached my firm to help them work through a financial model for building 1,500 hospitals in Nigeria. 3 tertiary, and then we have also those that are diagnostics, and then of course the, what you might call the primary health, centers. 1,500, 30 of them Nigerians in UK and in the US. And so if we want to encourage them, there should be a kind of provision in our tax system and maybe some other form of incentives that will encourage all diasporans who want to bring back what they have done for other countries into our own country here. So I agree with you, man, 100% on that particular issue. I've also interrogated the chat boxes, and one of them has spoken to, somebody said, do I agree with the governor's submission? I don't. That is very clear. I would prefer that we weigh more on derivation than on equality and population. Then somebody wrote something that you can't tax yourself to prosperity. I don't think we should see it in that light, that we are taxing access to prosperity. The reality is that, like the terminology I use, social compact, citizens give, government give in return. So, and we must not look at it, it's like, in fact, you can liken it to the philosophical question of which one came first, the chicken or the egg. So we call it philosophical, but you have to choose a point where you start from. So if I pay my tax and meet my obligations, okay, I have the moral ground to challenge government functionaries about what they are doing with the taxes I paid. Somebody had a question about mining. Mining really is a sector that works based on royalties and, of course, taxes. There are also tax holidays within that sector. There are already provisions when it comes to mining. The challenge there is enforcement and, of course, a lot of insecurity within that space. But what we're also advocating for is that in Nigeria, up to 92% of mining is artisanal. So what we're advocating is that government should find a way of integrating those artisanal miners into the formal arrangement so that we don't lose out on the royalties, and of course, taxes that the companies involved should pay. So that is what I will say in that regard. But I've not looked specifically at that also, but I don't think there's any change in that regard. What we have had as challenge there is implementation of what we have provided in the tax statutes for mining. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you very, very much. I think we have finally come to about where we are going to end, and we're going to call on Pastor to come and close us, and then we'll get your final thoughts. But on my own final thought, I just want to find out from you. For me, I believe the reason why we're having all this controversy is because of the optics. Coming up with a tax reform, tax suggests that you want to take money from the people. Maybe if we had called it something else, maybe economic reform to encourage business, employment creation and everything, and then throw in tax somewhere in there. It may not have been as controversial as it is now, because I see that tax bill is meant to achieve all of this. But we really want to thank you for the time. Pastor Itua, if you are ready, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Sonia. And I like the note on which you ended, in that maybe the phraseology or the terminology is a bit frightening to people and puts up their defenses and their guards straight away. Because when you talk about tax reform, what people simply think of now is that they want to tax us more. They want to do this, they want to do that. So I think this is more a revenue reform, both in terms of generation and distribution and expansion of the economic base of the country rather than just a tax reform. So maybe that's something to consider for those who to discuss with those driving the reform. But nonetheless, Prof, you've done a fantastic job. Even I am an accountant. I've been able to understand a bit better this issue of tax and what the federal government is trying to do. I think they should have a few more sessions, interactive sessions with different people groups so that people can really understand and discuss it properly, or even have a little TV presentation that they play from time to time so that they can engage the people. But nonetheless, we'll see how it goes. We'll make our own comments. And we're hoping that not only are we going to be able to reform the revenue base of our country, we're also going to be able to reform the appropriateness of expenditure to ensure that the expenditure gets to the right kind of people, does the right kind of things, and of course, make a real serious and sincere effort to fight corruption, because corruption is still a very, very strange animal that's really limiting the ability of government to deliver, in spite of all their efforts. But nonetheless, thank you very much. God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of the day and a great weekend ahead. I want to thank all our participants especially those who contributed and asked questions today. Again, by God's grace, we'll see you all same time next week on the African Leadership Group, the Nigerian Leadership Series. God bless you. Have a good evening and see you next week. Prof, God bless you. Thank you very much.